Good morning. Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah Sameach.
What happened there? There. Oh, there we go. My phone does weird things. A friend of mine sent me a beautiful story which relates the Parsha to Hanukkah, but I don't know if the rabbi is going to mention it today. It's a Shlomo Carlebach story.
Don't think I know it.
Oh, it's this is when he says that actually, in Parshas Miketz, we always read about Yosef in prison, and how he comes out, and that we always read that during Hanukkah. So he's, oh, there goes my dog. He says that so Potiphar's wife actually visited Yosef in the prison, and she said, if you do what I want, if you sleep with me, then Josh, get up. She says, if you do what I want, if you sleep with me, I'll get you out of prison. And Yosef says to her, do you know who I am? I'm one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, the 12 tribes of Israel. It's a holy person. He says, if Hashem wants me out of this prison, he'll get me out of this prison, not this way. So she left, and he thinks to himself that, I have a glimmer of hope. I think I will get out because Hashem wants me out, but I'm not going to do this. So, we hear the story, and he does eventually get out. And so what we learn is, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, he says that in truth, they say, well, okay, the miracle of Hanukkah is that, the one cruse of oil lasted for 8 days, and we had to wait 8 days to get more of the holy oil. He says, but in truth, halacha is that you don't actually have to have pure olive oil that's kosher in order to light the menorah. You can light the menorah with what you have. So it isn't a total halacha that you need to be pure. So the lesson we learn is that there are many ways that technically you can do things and you can get ahead, but there's only one way to do it the holy way and the correct way. And Yosef recognized this, that and you can get to places in many different ways, but if you're going to do it a holy way and a pure way, then you trust in God and you go that way. And so he says, and that's what the lesson is, that Yosef trusted in God. He wasn't going to take the easy way out. He was going to do it the correct way, and that's the holy way. And that's how we connect to Hanukkah, that they didn't just we only have this oil, we'll use everything else. No, they wanted to wait for the pure oil, and they got the miracle.
Oh.
That's paraphrasing. I'm sure that it was written better in the book, but basically that's the story and the connection. So the rabbi lost his voice over Shabbos. I hope he got it back so we can do the class today.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Happy Hanukkah. Did you get your voice back?
It's partially back. It's enough to teach some Torah, but we'll see how long it lasts.
Okay.
It's humbling to lose my key to speaking. Is my I rely on it so much. But it's been humbling to not have to not be able to speak like I want to.
Rabbi, I just want to mention I paid a Shiva call today. I don't know if you know Rav Avraham Yitzchak Levine, who's the grandson of Aryeh Levin.
Yeah, of course.
Alec Kinwood. So he passed away on Friday. And they're sitting Shiva at Benji Levine's, Benji.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I was just over there this afternoon with Marsha to pay a Shiva call. It was sad.
Yeah. What was the Shiva house like?
Pretty crowded.
I could imagine so.
All kinds of people, a lot of family. He was that Avram Yitzchak was, besides growing up with him, he was also my 6th grade teacher. He was a very fine person.
Wow.
Very fond memories of him. So it's sad to see.
Where did you interact with him as an adult?
Very little as an adult. He was the rabbi of the Zwillenbergs. And so when they got married, he was the Masada Kedusha. And then the other brother's daughter ended up at the University of Massachusetts and ended up being a student of mine and working for me. And she was married, and when she had a Pidyon of Ben down in the Bronx, I went down there, and he was also the rabbi. So I see him occasionally, very occasionally.
A few touch points.
Yeah,
that's meaningful. And tell us a little bit about the spirit of Hanukkah in Israel. What's going on there?
There's been a lot of activities. The streets are packed. It's just we were on a bus coming back from the Shiva, and it was so crowded, the bus wouldn't move. So I made Marsha get off the bus, and we went of all places, went through Machane Yehuda. It was like you couldn't even get through there. It was just crazy.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people. We're near the first station, so there's a lot of activities and stuff going on there, and it's nice. We're going down to Eilat tomorrow with the family.
Oh, fun! I guess
Yeah.
they have off for Hanukkah.
They do, yes. The kids do, and the
That's
adults.
nice.
Hopefully, everything will be nice.
Well, you'd be happy to know, and Amy as well, to know that last night we had a meeting with an artist to put together the sketch for a mural that's going to live in the hallway of our shul that will give honor and recognition to members of our community who have served in the IDF and or made Aliyah.
Nice.
So I have your I have your list that you compiled over here. And
I have another name. I have another name to add to it.
Okay. Well, once we get to that phase, I think we'll try to tighten it up a bit and ask all these people if they want to be on it.
Okay.
Ask around if we're missing anybody.
It is kind of a living list, isn't it? Because there are more and more people from the shul who are.
Yeah, the design is going to be, I mean, this is really rough, but from Lake Massapog to Lake Kinneret, and there's going to be like an airplane, going from one to the other. And then there'll be like an Israeli flag sort of in the center, which will have I don't know how best to describe it, but we'll have little sort of pieces that will be able, like almost like Lego, to like put on a name that goes on, and it'll have lots of space to add more families that join the ranks.
Very
Nice.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have it up by either Yom Ha'atzmaut or Yom Yerushalayim this year.
Nice.
Yeah, it's an exciting project. And
We'll have to raise money.
Yeah, a little bit. Do you want to give?
I'm sure she does.
Of course.
But I've raised about half already. I got the final quote last night for how much it's going to be from the artist, and he's actually looking to take the model of the Atzei Chaim, the Eitz Chaim one that that you, I think Dan and Marsha commissioned. that has like a frame to it, so that it's potentially movable if needed. Okay, let's dive in here to a bit of Torah about Yosef and Hanukkah. Good morning, Esther. I see you there too.
Good morning. Good morning.
And hi, Janie. And
Hi, I'll be on visible very soon.
okay. And I see
I
John.
just took my time this morning.
Okay. No worries. And I see John and Heather as well. Welcome. Okay, so Miketz represents the most sudden and radical transformation in the Torah, in the sense that Yosef, in a single day, goes from 0 to hero, from being forgotten, the prisoner who the last word in Parshat Vayeshev is Vayishkachehu, that Yosef was forgotten by the butler, and by the end of Parshat Miketz, he is the second most powerful man in Egypt, and he has the reins of the economy. So Yosef's quick rise to power is a bit controversial in terms of whether what he did was appropriate or maybe he went too far. On the one hand, of course, he rescued an entire civilization from hunger and from famine. On the other hand, he amassed a lot of power to the Egyptian pharaoh. So Rabbi Sachs looks at the possibility of Yosef overstepping, and part of the consequence of that is devastating, in the sense that it lands the Jewish people in a location where there's a despot that has absolute power. So let's look at some of the material here, and we'll tie things together. So in source number 1, we learn that Yosef dies before all his brothers as a form of punishment. V'hamanhi gatzmo berabanut da'amar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina. So one who conducts himself with a sense of rabbanut. What does rabbanut mean? It doesn't mean like being a rabbi necessarily, right? It means rabbanut is authority. But particular, it's the kind of authority of like governmental authority. So somebody who amasses for themselves a lot of political power. Rabbi Chama bar Chanina mipnei ma meit Yosef kodem la'achav mipnei shehinhig atzmo b'rabbanut. So why is it that Yosef died before his brothers? Because he amassed himself so much political power. So what might be the sort of biological reason for an early death? People who have a lot of stress. It wears down their body. And so perhaps it's just a natural consequence of always being in the hot seat, always making tough decisions. But how else could we read this statement of Chazal? As a punishment, I would submit that Yosef is being sort of reprimanded in some way. Janie, could you mute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize I was making noise.
That's okay. Thank you. My voice is a little bit softer, so I just want less interruptions. But I do encourage participation. So So it's possible that Yosef here his life is being shortened as a punishment because he made some poor choices and perhaps he went too far. When did Yosef go too far in conducting himself with an air of superiority? What comes to mind?
Well, how he treats his brothers first, when he was young and was kind of lording it over them with his dreams. And then when they come for food, just the way that he treated them and the way that he deceived them and he makes them spies and he allowed them to call him our master. He took one of the brothers, he took Sean and put him in prison, and they said, give me Binyamin, and he put the cup in Binyamin's thing, just sneaking around and doing it like that.
Right, indeed. So those are, I would say, the primary examples that come to mind when we think about Yosef lording himself over others. Right? He doesn't have to say everything that he thinks when it comes to the dreams, right? He doesn't have to reveal everything that happened to him. He doesn't have to brag about what his interpretation of the dreams are, that he is going to be a king over his siblings, right? It's one thing to have the dream, it's another thing to share it, it's another thing to share it in the way that he did, bragging about it with the Ketonet Pasim. He sort of puts the favoritism of his father in their face and causes strife and tension and animosity. So I think that's the sort of primary, those are the primary examples in which Yosef conducted himself with an air of superiority, for which he was punished. He dies long before his brothers do. But Rabbi Sachs suggests an alternative track for Yosef lording himself over others sort of inappropriately. So let's look at the second source. And if you're up for it, Amy, I'll ask you to, or Dan, are you able to read?
Sure.
Okay, we can take it in the English. And
Okay.
Just to give the context, right, this is after Yosef interprets the dreams of Paro with the 7 skinny cows eating the 7 fat cows. And he says that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of famine are going to totally consume, swallow up, and destroy the years of plenty. And so then Yosef suggests collecting produce from the people and storing it in large sort of storehouses so that there will be enough to last through the famine. So we're sort of 1 year into the famine, and people have become dependent upon the establishment for survival. They need to go to the king or to Paro just for their daily provisions. So let's see how Yosef sort of slowly and gradually and very strategically moves the economy to be sort of dependent upon Paro. Go ahead.
Quite a business head. And Joseph said, "Bring your livestock and I will sell to you against your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle, and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We cannot hide from my lord that, with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread. We will bread our land, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may be not may not become a waste. So Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, all the Egyptians having sold their fields because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Pharaoh, and he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other.
Great. So we see here at least 4 stages of consolidation of power. First, Yosef amasses all of the possessions, at least the possessions of livestock of the Egyptians. And then after wiping that asset, from the general population, he moves on to the farmland, and they have to sell all of their land to him. And then after that is totally transferred, and they start sort of renting it back, from Paro. Then all they have left is their bodies, so they become serfs. They become people who are providing their labor towards the Egyptian monarch. And following that, there's one last stage here in the last pasuk, is he actually starts enforcing a policy of resettlement. So the question is, was Yosef right to do this? Seemingly, he did it on his own accord. He was not asked by Paro to go through these 4 progressive stages of power consolidation, but he did it on his own. And the question is, was he correct to go about this strategic effort, or was this overstepping? What do you think?
I assume he was trying to gain some favor in Paro's eyes.
Indeed. So we
Nice
could commiserate with him in the sense that he was desperate for validation, and this was the way to Paro's heart, as evidenced by the fact that as a result of this, Yosef held on to the second seat of power in the empire. So it's possible that as Yosef was going about these various sort of policies, that Paro was egging him on, and saying, "This is great, this is fantastic." Even though we don't, see Paro doing that explicitly, we would imagine that these would gain favor. These would gain Yosef favor in Paro's eyes.
What about all of the Egyptian people? Were they all that dumb? I mean, it was an agrarian society. They knew that sometimes the Nile came and watered the place. Sometimes there was famine. Is it truly possible that the entire nation was so clueless that only Yosef had the foresight to see all of this happening, and everybody else was just like, oh, we don't know, we'll just, whatever happens, and that's why they just kept digging themselves into deeper and deeper, that not one of them thought, oh, why don't I build a silo and save some of my grain for later? Why don't I do it? How is it possible that the entire nation, the only one who had the foresight was Yosef, and nobody else thought of it?
Well, nobody else had the insider information about the 7 years of famine that were coming. Yosef held that, to himself. And people, obviously, some people found out because he was, saving up a stockpile. But if I were to, take out an ad in the Boston Globe saying there's going to be a famine for 7 years, right? How many people would believe me?
So it's like Noah, who spent 100 years building the ark, and nobody believed that there was really going to be rain. So nobody helped him. Nobody went on board with him. And that's why the world was destroyed.
I think that's the shot. I think Yosef knew this information. Paro trusted him because he had nothing to lose and only something to gain. And everyone else just thought this guy's crazy. And but once they were hungry, they were desperate, and they did everything and anything they could to survive. So they sold their possessions, their land, and their bodies, and they even were willing to be resettled. This last part of Et ha'am ha'aviro tol arim. Why did he need to do this population transfer? Why not allow them to stay on their own farms?
Possibly they might have wanted to figured it out and fight for their arms and settlers' rights or squatters' rights or whatever. They might have eventually mobilized and tried to do something. So by removing the population, I mean, it's like when the temple was destroyed, why were the Jews sent into exile? Why weren't they just conquered and ruled over? But no, the enemy actually exiled them so that without the land, without anything, they were stateless, they were homeless, they didn't have the ability to dig their heels in and fight back and everything. They would make them totally helpless if they're exiled.
I'm so glad you brought up that point about the Assyrian strategy of exiling people was to mix up their populations and to dispossess them of their ancestral land because it weakened them. It limited their ability to mobilize and rebel, right? And Rabbi Sachs, towards the end of this piece, wonders whether this is the first time that strategy has been employed in human history. We know that the Assyrians do it much later, but perhaps they look to Yosef as a precedent, as someone who introduced that strategy to the world.
But Yosef moved them town by town, and my understanding, the standard interpretation is that means people in one town moved together to another town rather than being separated. If you really wanted to confuse things, you'd not have neighbors stay neighbors.
Right. So perhaps the Assyrians took it to another level, but the idea of population transfer to take people away from the places and the resources that they are familiar with weakens their hand, right? Even if they are still neighbors with their old neighbors, they're living in somebody else's house and things are not familiar. It takes a while to get grounded and comfortable and feel secure. And so Rabbi Sachs, wonders whether Yosef is overstepping his authority here, because he could have still amassed wealth for Paro, saved the people without having to weaken their hand to this extent to create a nation of slaves that had no upward mobility. He created a highly centralized power, which ironically becomes used against his own people. Right? The phrase that I bolded here is that Yosef says, "Avadim leparo," right? That the Egyptians should become slaves to Paro. Now, when we think about the first time that Avadim leparo is mentioned in the Torah, it's not the Jews, it's the Egyptians. But once the economy rebounded and the Egyptians had more self-determination, there was a void of avadim. And that's perhaps why Paro, wanted the Jews to become his avadim, because he was accustomed to that workforce, somebody to build his pyramids, somebody to construct his temples. So Yosef, in some ways, there is an implied criticism of his character by the fact that he introduced forms of oppression that were used against his own people, whether it was the notion of avdut or the notion of or the strategy of population resettlement. Those both came full circle and were directed against the Jewish people in generations to come. And so perhaps there is sort of a veiled critique of Yosef's political power here, that he took it too far. And I'll just read one paragraph from Rabbi Sachs here. He says that Joseph left the system into which he was elevated less humane than it was by making Paro more powerful than he had been. Leon Cass, in the beginning of Wisdom, says about Yosef's decision to make the people pay for food in the years of famine, food that they themselves had handed over during the years of plenty, that, quote, Yosef is saving life by making Paro rich and soon all-powerful. While we may applaud Yosef's forethought, we are rightly made uneasy by this man who profits from exercising his God-like power over life and death. Joseph's sagacity, I think is how it's pronounced, is technical and managerial, not moral and political. He is long on forethought and planning out, but short on understanding the souls of men. So Yosef should have stayed in his lane in terms of, salvaging the Egyptian people by getting enough food for them and then giving it back to them without charging them for it. He didn't have to dispossess them of their livestock, of their land, of their homes, right? That was taking things too far. And so perhaps that's what it means when Chazal critique Yosef in the first source here. He died early because he conducted himself with an air of superiority, right? That he really took things too far, and it came back to really bite his own children and grandchildren, who became enslaved to the system that he had created. He generated a kind of power structure that would eventually be used against his own people. So a quick tie-in to the lessons of Hanukkah. And John, you'll forgive me because you were here, I think, on Shabbat afternoon when I mentioned this source. But as I was putting together this Parsha class, I couldn't help but make the connection to the Hashmonaim, who also were people that overstepped their power and left their lane as Kohanim. And the Ramban, we won't read through the whole source, but I will just share that the Ramban, at the end of Sefer Breshit, when Yaakov is giving the brachot to his sons on his deathbed, he says to his son Yehuda, Lo Yasur Shevet mi Yehuda, that the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, meaning that political power is meant to be held by that tribe and no other tribe. Now, there are other forms of power, right? There is political power, which is the Melech of Yehuda, and then there's also the priestly power, which is from Shevet Levi and the Kohanim, and there's also Nevi'im, right? Prophetic power, which can come as a sort of meritocracy, whoever can deserve and earn it and climb that ladder. And the Ramban goes through various examples when the Jewish people veered from having political authority in the tribe of Yehuda. Like the first king was Shaul, and what Shevet did Shaul come from?
Binyamin.
Right. So even that was a violation of this expectation that Yehuda would hold the reins to political power for the Jewish people. And so the Ramban says that this was part of a concession, that when Shmuel appointed Shaul, that wasn't because God really wanted it. His hand was sort of forced. And so he did it in a temporary way, that the political power of the monarchy would soon be stripped from Shaul, as it was, and taken away from Binyamin and given to David. who was from which tribe?
That's Yehuda.
Good. Okay. So how does this relate to the story of Hanukkah? So I'll sort of just scroll down here a bit and show you that the Ramban goes to task on the Chashmonaim. He says that the Chashmonaim were the priestly class. I'll just read here. V'zehaya, oops. Hold on a second. Okay. V'zehaya onesh hachashmonaim shemalchu bebeit sheni, bebeit sheni. That the Chashmonaim were punished during the Second Temple, ki hayu chasidei alyon, because originally they were great pious people. The Amalehem nishkakachu Torah b'hamitzvot miYisrael, and if not for them, the Jewish people would have fully Hellenized and assimilated into Greek culture. But nevertheless, nashu onesh gadol, they suffered a great punishment. Ki arba'at b'nei Chashmonai hazaken chasdim melachim zachar zeh, because the four Chashmonaim powers that ruled after the miracle of Hanukkah and appointed themselves as king over the Jewish people, im kol gevuratam v'atzlachatam, with all of their power and might, naflu biad oivehem b'cherem, they were decimated. V'higia ha'onesh b'sof, and they were punished brutally. At the end of the story, 25 years after Hanukkah, we have record from from Josephus about the devastation of the Chashmonaim. They were all butchered, and the Ramban says that they got what was coming to them because they should have remained Kohanim, and as Kohanim, they should not have become kings. That role was meant to stay in the tribe of Yehuda. And because they left their lane and went outside their role, they imploded and they sort of brought a punishment upon themselves. And for this reason, we sort of conjectured on Shabbat that the rabbis don't really remember the Chashmonaim as playing a critical role in the Hanukkah miracle. After the Hanukkah miracle, they really emphasize the role that the Kohanim played in the Nes Hashemen, of finding the oil and making it extend, or lighting it, and then having it extend the full 8 days. But there is no valorization of the Chashmonaim's consolidation of political power following the miracle, because that really was a violation of God's expectation that political power should remain in the hands of the tribe of Yehuda.
Was every other king of Israel from Yehuda?
There were kings later from the tribe of
Yes.
Yehuda who replaced the Chashmonaim.
Mhm.
But there was a deviation from that thread, from that sort of from that policy. The Chashmonaim themselves broke it, and religious leaders got too involved in political affairs. And that perhaps is somewhat akin to Yosef, who was a great economist, who was a great manager, who was a prophetic leader, but he overstepped his his authority. And the ultimate sort of verdict on that overstepping is how the systems that he created came back to hurt his own descendants. So there are certain risks of power that Yosef sort of suffers from, just like the Chashmonaim did. So we can sort of appreciate sort of a negative example of both of those, both of those, as people who got too enraptured in politics and ended up causing a lot of harm as a result.
I'm reminded there was, I think it was in the 80s, maybe Amy remembers the name. There was a priest who was a congressman for a number of years until the church told him no
Father
more.
Drinan.
Wasn't it Father Drinan?
Father
Yeah.
Drinan, how he was fabulous. He was from
Yeah.
Brookline, but then they
He was a
called him
good
back.
guy.
They said, don't get in politics. So he ended up becoming a professor at Georgetown University.
Yeah, so sometimes a division of power is really critical for boundaries.
So Lahavdil in America. So who's the longest living person who was president of the United States? And that's Jimmy Carter, who, when he was president, was not much of a president. His record was poor. He was hands-on. And he's, even to this day, he's not very good to Israel or anything, but he worked with Habitat for Humanity, was more of a humane type of a person. So he's lived a long life. He's like 97 years old and still going.
He's 98, yeah.
98, yeah.
Yeah.
He's half the man he was.
He was a peanut farmer.
We remember him well. I remember his brother, Billy.
Billy Deer.
I still have it.
So indeed, it's sometimes problematic when people overstep their rightful authority and meddle in things that don't really belong to them. And
But Yosef knew. He knew that he was going to die before his brothers, because didn't he say to them, he says, when I die, I want you to take my bones back to Israel. So he was saying this to his brothers. Most of them are older than he is. So if he's telling them, when I die, bring my bones back, didn't he kind of sense he was going to die before them?
I always understood that to mean that he was talking to their kids, right? Make sure that this happens.
Yeah, one doesn't necessarily follow the other in that respect.
But nevertheless, Yosef does a lot of good, but also has a lasting legacy of creating systems of oppression and harm that really caused damage to his own descendants. And so, perhaps he went too far, just like the Chashmonaim should have let the Judean kings become or reassume the throne after winning back the Temple Mount. They shouldn't have overstepped the priestly role and appointed themselves as kings. So it's a sort of a parallel lesson that we can learn both from our Parsha and from Hanukkah. Okay, I'm gonna step out here as my voice is giving out a bit. So I'll wish
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
a happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah Sameach.
Sameach.
Okay,
Sameach.
great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yes.